Get ready for some satisfying payback. Story 1. You bugged my car? Now you'll have lot listen to what I think about you. A petty divorce tale. This gem of a story unfolded over the past few days, and I think it's too hilarious not to share. Not in the US or any other English-speaking country. I have a friend. Let's call her Lisa. She's in her 50s, has been married forever, and has spent way too much of that time putting up with her nightmare of a husband. Lisa had thought about divorcing him more times than she can count, but she always hesitated because she knew he'd turn the process into a living hell. Well, 2 months ago, Lisa finally snapped. She decided it was time to break free and filed for divorce. Cue her husband. Let's call him Todd the Terrible, immediately proving her right by going full-on paranoid spy mode. First, he installed surveillance cameras all over their house, which, unfortunately, is technically legal in our country as long as he's living there too. But Lisa's pretty sure he also planted some illegal listening devices because, get this, that's the exact advice he gave his brother during his own divorce. As if that wasn't creepy enough, Todd took her car for 2 days because it's the family car. He never uses the family car as he got his own car, right after she handed him the divorce papers. Plenty of time to slap on a GPS tracker or a few bugs, right? His excuse for all this James Bond-level nonsense? He claims Lisa is cheating. Spoiler alert, she is not. But here's the kicker. In my country, divorce means splitting everything 50-50 regardless, unless something truly extreme comes up. So even if Lisa were sneaking off to rendezvous with the entire team of Kansas City Chiefs, it wouldn't change a thing. Todd's tantrum is entirely pointless. Now, Lisa doesn't have the time or money to check her car for gadgets, and the whole situation is understandably frustrating. So I suggested the perfect petty revenge, turning his creepy surveillance obsession against him. Now, when she is in the car, she regularly puts on a show, loudly announcing gems like, "Your D******'s so small they need a microscope to find what you're working with. You're the worst sex I've ever had, and I've had bad sex. I feel sorry for your future dates. They'll need a search party to find any satisfaction." She's tried it a few times now and tells me it's more satisfying than therapy. Story 2. The time my parents told me not to touch the thermostat. A few years back, I was watching my parents' house while they went out of town. My stepdad is a decent dude, but they were supposedly having issues with the thermostat. I say supposedly because my grandmother was also living with them, and the three of them never agreed on temperature. And when they were getting ready to leave, he told me, "Don't touch the thermostat." I responded with something like, "Well, what if it gets too hot or cold?" "No, just don't touch it." Good. Got it. For context, they live in the South, so we usually had, and currently, had the AC running. Well, lo and behold, a cold, nothing crazy, front came through. I don't prefer the cold, but I sure do enjoy being in blankets when it's cold. So as the temperature dropped, I just would add another blanket to my hibernation pile. But I sure as shit wasn't going to touch the thermostat. He made that very clear. By the time they got back, the thermostat was at 50 degrees. When they walked in, they immediately were like, "What the F? Is the thermostat broken?" I looked directly at them and said, "I don't know, you told me not to touch it." Story 3. Idiot going the wrong way doesn't get the right of way. My grocery has narrow, one-way rows of angled parking and the lot is very busy, in part because there's a shopping mall attached to its feeder road and jerks will often speed through the lot from the feeder road to avoid a stoplight. These entitled idiots frequently don't grasp the concept of one way and cause traffic jams when they inevitably encounter drivers going the right way. It's dangerous. The many other cars and pedestrians don't expect morons barreling down the road the wrong way. When one of these traffic jams happens, the easiest way to fix it is the person who's going the right way has to pull back into a parking space, assuming there's an empty one, thus enabling the wrong way idiot to pass. Recently I was shopping with a friend and, as expected, we pulled out of our spot, and naturally we soon met with a moron in a gigantic pickup truck bombing up the row the wrong way. Twice as big as my friend's car and radiating compensation. Well, it turns out she'd had enough of these people. On this day, most parking spaces around us were filled, but there was one right there that she could have pulled into. Mr. Small Dick Energy in the pickup felt so entitled to right of way, he even stopped far enough back so she could pull into the spot for his convenience. Rather than do so, she surprised everyone by exaggeratedly slowing down and stopping a few feet from his huge bumper. Mr. Small Dick Energy then had the nerve to rev his engine a few times and kept creeping forward threateningly, as if he was going to force us to back way up to the end of the aisle so he didn't have to do the same. My friend put the car in park and just waited. He then honked his horn at her, as if she were the one going the wrong way. She pulled out her phone and started recording him. I was kind of scared he might road rage us to death, But he didn't. Behind us, the stoplight he should have gone through turned green, and I could see him seething as he watched all the normal drivers he thought he'd cut off getting their turn. In the end, infuriated, he threw his truck into reverse and slammed on the gas, backing up way too fast for a parking lot. About 4 parking spaces back, he miscalculated the angle of his wheel and wanged the back of his pickup on a cart corral. Not a disabling accident, and luckily he didn't hit a pedestrian, but I'm sure that'll cost him a pretty penny. He didn't even stop to get out and inspect the damage, most likely because he'd managed to publicly shame himself in such a grand fashion. It was so satisfying. Story 4. Outsmarting your crooked partner can be very satisfying. Years ago, at 26, I entered a partnership in a small CD/music store with a man in his 50s who already owned another store. The partnership was meant to share buying costs and advertising. Once we opened, I discovered he was skimming inventory, and we had leased a much larger space than necessary under the pretense of him subleasing the extra space for his office, which never happened. After 3 exhausting years, during which he continued his dishonest practices, the store went broke. We had around $25,000 in equipment and another $20,000 in inventory. Although he ripped me off, to avoid a legal battle, I agreed that we'd sell off the remaining inventory and equipment and split the profits. I needed to get away from him quickly, even though my share would be far less than what he took from me. My star employee/manager, whom my partner had since taken to his other store, informed me that my partner was negotiating a sale of everything the next morning to settle a debt of his. Realizing my partner intended to keep me in the dark, I hired movers to empty the storage garage we had rented. I took back all my belongings early the next morning. As we were leaving, I saw the other truck arriving. Later that day, my ex-manager confirmed that the truck was from the debt collector. Their crew arrived to find the garage empty. They ended up in court, each accusing the other. It ended with my ex-partner still on the hook for his debt. I called him acting like I wanted the update on when we'd sell the inventory and furnishings. He simply said it was stolen. I just hung up as if I was upset. I sold off the remaining equipment over the next year, slowly recouping part of my losses. Had he been honest with me, at least during our liquidation, nearly $20,000 of that would have been his. In total, he took much more than that from me, so no, I didn't feel I took a thing from him. Fast forward 4 to 5 years, I spotted him in a restaurant parking lot as I was driving off. He smugly asked how I was doing, fully aware of his wrongdoing. I replied that I was fantastic. Then, with a huge grin, I said, "So, you still haven't figured out where the stuff went?" His smug smile turned to fury as I drove off, telling him to have a wonderful day. Story 5. The Accidental Cupid. Okay, so when I was in primary school, I was a bit of a chaotic little gremlin. I had this thing I'd do where I'd write fake love notes to girls, pretending they were from the sweatiest, stinkiest, most questionable guys in class. Why? Pure pettiness. It was my twisted way of getting back at girls I didn't like. There was this one girl, let's call her Wilma. I couldn't stand her. She was my mortal enemy in the 5th grade for reasons I can't even remember now. And then there was Alex, the unfortunate sweaty guy of the class. Alex smelled like sour milk that had been left out in the sun, and he was a little on the chubby side. Obviously, I decided they were the perfect victims for my master prank. I carefully crafted a love note in Alex's handwriting, which was basically just a series of crooked chicken scratches that said something like, "Hi Wilma, I like you. Do you want to date me?" From Alex. I slipped it into her bag during lunch, thinking this was going to be the most epic prank of all time. After lunch, Wilma found the note and went absolutely bananas. She was showing it to everyone, saying stuff like, "OMG, Alex likes me." I tried to play it cool and asked her what it said, and she was all, "None of your business." Here's where it gets wild. Alex didn't even deny it. He just stood there, probably sweating even more than usual, and said something like, "Yeah, maybe I do." My brilliant prank totally backfired because, not long after, Wilma and Alex started hanging out during lunch. They'd sit together, giggling and sharing sandwiches, while I sat there stewing in my own failure. Fast forward to years later, I was bored and stalking Wilma's social media. Don't judge me, we've all done it. And guess what? She freaking married him. They have a kid together and everything. All because of me. I played Cupid without even meaning to. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I should send them an anonymous message like, "Hey, congrats on the family. BTW. Your whole relationship started as a petty prank. You're welcome." Story 6. I encourage Indeed negative reviews. Sorta like the title says. Except it's from my old job/company. They effed me over bad and did me dirty, hiring me for no reason. But the manager in charge felt threatened by me. I truly was a solid employee and had hunger to grow, learn, overwork myself, etc. This was a while back. My managers starting off were great. The last one was an external hire and couldn't answer a phone call, let alone should be a manager. He's too concerned about who he can bang and make sure he only hires ones within a certain criteria that is completely inappropriate. The company has a 2.6 rating on Indeed. Constantly, there are negative reviews and a few positive reviews. I would have had a positive review too if I wasn't working under a dirtbag for half my time there. Anyways, since that time, I go back and make sure I thumbs up all the negative reviews as they come in, doing this so no one else considers working with them, or to encourage that the negative reviews are in fact true to how they are. It's stupid and petty, but I'd celebrate if that company burns down. They fired me days before Thanksgiving, a single mother, who had the TOP performance and saved the company millions. Yes, that's right, millions. Just another crooked corporate system. Story 7. She made my hands freeze. Early February last year, my partner and I traveled to Japan, which was winter season. Midway through our trip, one morning we woke up to the aftermath of what was an overnight snowstorm. Excited, we both ran outside, danced in the snow, and posed for photos. One photo, my partner asked me to pose for what was me holding a snowball. Naive me, thinking it was a quick 5-second photo opportunity, obliged. However, she was taking her time, rotating the phone and telling me to hold still. And after the snow started to attack my hands with frozen temperature spells, I started asking, "Are you done yet?" And partner responds with evil grin and laughs before I realized what she was doing and dropped the pile of snow in defeat, while she laughed and pat herself on the back for a prank well done. Fast forward to last month, December, and we're back in Japan, the same town, and we're both just walking along the streets and admiring the Christmas and New Year's decorations. I'm basking in the views when my partner calls out, "Hey, look, photo please." I turn around and there she is, smiling, holding a pile of snow. I pull my phone out, and before I even do anything, my brain flashbacks to that awful minute in February 2024 when my hands were wronged and how this was an amazing opportunity for justice. So I aim the camera at her, rotate the angle, say, "Hold still for just a bit longer. A bit longer. Let me get this angle right. Damn, the brightness of the snow. Let me adjust that." Partner is looking at me dumbfounded, wondering why I'm taking so long for what she thought was a simple 5-second photo, until she spots the devilish grin on my face. And then the penny dropped. Did you just seriously wait 10 months to get back at me for that? Me. Grins. For the rest of the afternoon, she was in disbelief at how I still remembered what she did 10 months later and how I got back at her. But my hands got their sweet, cold justice. Story 8. A petty war that's been going for decades. So, people of the interwebs, I bring you some of the short stories of the petty revenge war that exists since God knows how long. You see, my grandmother has 3 daughters, being my mother the oldest. Apparently, my mother and her younger sister have been on this petty revenge back and forth for so long that neither remember why and how it started. I only noticed it in my early 20s when I walked in on my mother taking a bite on a raw potato that later ended up being served to my aunt as a side for her dinner. She did that to get back at my aunt for taking a bite on a specific apple that she had bought to make a pie. My mother's words to me were, "You saw nothing." Over the years, me and my uncle, my aunt's SO, started discussing this petty and very funny war that has been going. Since we both are in a privileged position to share each side of the behind the scenes, some of these stories were told to me by my uncle because they happened before I was born, more than 3 decades ago. Others, I actually lived them. Some, I was forced to play a part in them. Please enjoy this petty degeneracy. When my aunt was an early teen, she would steal my mother's makeup because she didn't have her own. My mother was not happy because she saved to buy her own stuff. Grandmother found out and punished her by giving her a stack of sheets of paper and making her write something every day. A prose, a poem, a letter, etc. She would get her own makeup when the stack was finished, and she couldn't cheat because my GM knew how many sheets there were. My mother took this opportunity to buy the same kind of sheet of paper and kept adding a sheet every day while my aunt was at school. This drove my aunt nuts because months later she was not seeing any progress with the stack not decreasing. Eventually, my GM found out and out a stop to it. Now these ones are recent. Christmas is always celebrated, either on our house or on my aunt's house. The guests cooks and the hosts clean. Don't ask me why. It has been this way since I remember. A few years ago on our house, my aunt used every single thing in the kitchen. Literally, Eris. It took us a couple days to wash it all. Next year, my mother rearranged my aunt's entire kitchen. She changed the placement of every single thing. She swapped whole drawers in a kitchen. My uncle says it drove my aunt nuts not being able to find her stuff on her own kitchen, and it took them far too long to reorganize everything again. Then, the year after that, my aunt took small parts of anything that was not a whole piece and hid them all over the kitchen. Quite genius. Everything seemed fine when they left. But then you want coffee? There's filter holder. Want a microwave? Very. The plate is there, but not the little wheels underneath it, so it does not turn. Want a smoothie? That. The little lid on the machine that prevents everything to go directly into the ceiling is nowhere to be found. You get the picture. Everything was hidden either inside pots we never use, mixed inside the flour bag, etc. Next Christmas, I noticed that my mother had a bag full of different food container lids in the trunk of her car when I was loading the presents on her car, but honestly didn't think much of it. When we left, the bag was still there, full of lids. As turns out, my mother had sneaked the bag to my aunt's house and swapped all my aunt's container lids with those she brought, essentially leaving my aunt with a bunch of containers and lids that didn't fit each other. Not a single fit. I found out a few days later from a call from my uncle asking if we did something to the containers because he found my aunt on the kitchen floor, surrounded by lids and containers, bawling from frustration. This one is a fail. One of many, may I add, but I think it's worth mentioning. My uncle confessed to me that sometimes he and my aunt get into arguments because she spends too much money on gifts to my mother, but not in a good way. Apparently, whenever she buys clothes to my mother, she will buy my mother's size, and then the same exact clothing one size up. She is really good at sewing, so she swaps the tags in hopes that my mom thinks that she is increasing in size, so she double spends just to be petty. And it fails, because since my aunt lives in another country, my mom just thinks that where she lives the clothes are sized differently. I have heard my mom saying that in more than one occasion to her friends. It failed a few times already, but I gotta be honest, that had the potential to be a mastermind play right there. I think this should be enough for now. This post is already super long. I have a lot more stories from over the years, but I don't want to turn this post into a book. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for reading. Story 9. Petty, but I got my pliers back. I loaned my Snap-on pliers to a stranger when I was young, dumb, and poor. Well, to my surprise, they didn't return in an hour, as the borrower had informed me. I called a few times over the following days, and then he decided to tell me to F off. Wrong idea, buddy. I called him every 2 hours for 2 days. Nothing. I called every hour for 2 days. Nothing. I opened my flip phone on my toolbox, and every time I walked by or grabbed something, I hit talk/talk and walked away. Old flip phone user know that's a redial shortcut that would then leave long voicemails. This went on for over a week until he answered and told me to stop calling. I said bring my pliers back and then doubled down on the calling. Middle of the night, get up to pee. Talk/talk. Go to the bar and just keep hitting talk/talk in my pocket. 3 buddies' phones all talk/talk until his phone never stopped ringing. Ever. I got my pliers back. Now I take a deposit that is big enough I could buy 2 new tools if loaned. Story 10. Don't piss off someone who knows lots about weed killers. We shifted countries for career opportunities, leased our lovely 2-story home up a steep driveway long-term to a well-known local socialite and local government publicity manager. All was good, then his mom with early dementia arrived, and our home was suddenly unsuitable. The driveway was declared dangerous, it wasn't. The staircase was illegal, it wasn't. The upstairs deck railings were unsafe, they weren't. He wriggled and squirmed to get out without breaking his lease. We offered to help, but he was hard to deal with. Suddenly the rent stopped, he'd done a runner, and disappeared. Hilly. It annoyed us, and we lost money in rent and paying tidying up costs. But it wasn't worth pursuing legally, especially as we're busy overseas. 2 years later we returned, and while visiting my brother in another city, I saw a nice old Jaguar XJ6 I recognized. It was Mr. Tennant's. He bought a house down the road from Little Bro. That afternoon, my knowledge as farm agrochemicals advisor kicked in. I visited a farm supply and garden center, bought paint aerosols, and 2 long-term herbicides. That night, embarrassing graffiti appeared on his front fence calling him a cheat and a wanker. And after he'd got that removed, his roadside verge lawn had a huge cunt slowly emerge, which took months to disappear, despite him top-dressing it and trying to reseed it. What a pity. Story 11. Ding the door on my truck and parts will fall off of your transmission. My neighbor years ago opened her door into my truck and dinged it. I saw her do it, but she denied it, and there were no witnesses or cameras. I filed a report but was told it was he said, she said, and was a civil matter. I had just rebuilt a differential and had a jacked up pinion gear. She drove a four-wheel drive half-ton Chevy. I don't know what gave me the idea to do this, but I put the pinion gear under her truck and I put a heavy HVAC zip tie around her drive shaft so it would slap the muffler. I knew what time she left in the morning, so I came out and watched for her. She backed out of the parking spot. Tink, 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 tink. She stopped when she heard the noise. Then she noticed the pinion gear on the ground. She got out and I walked up and asked her if something was wrong. She said her truck was making a funny sound and asked me if I knew what the pinion gear was. I told her it looked like it was part of a transmission and she better have it towed. She asked me if I knew of a good shop. Now, this was not originally part of my plan, but I ran with it. I gave her the name of a shop that had a really bad reputation of being kind of shady. The truck was gone for 2 weeks. I asked her what she found out, and she told me the shop told her that she needed a new transmission and a bunch of other stuff. Apparently, she ended up spending something like $3,500 to fix my zip tie and used car part on the ground. I took my truck into a body shop and had the door fixed for about $300. She was a snobbish bitch, and I know she was talking down to the people at the shop. She treated anyone that was not college educated with disdain. Story 12. Sit there laughing at me at the petrol station? I'll inconvenience you even more. This was a few years ago. I pulled into my local petrol station. All the pumps were in use, so I pulled up behind one of the pumps, waiting for the van, using it to finish and move off. After quite a few minutes, the driver casually strolled out of the shop in no hurry, despite the queue at the busy forecourt, and walked to his van. He could see that I and several other vehicles were queuing to use the pumps. The van driver in the pump next to him was obviously a friend. That driver finished up, and the two of them stood and had a chat. They were aware of us waiting and were clearly loving the fact that they were holding us all up, even turning to laugh arrogantly at the guy waiting next to me who called to them to move away from the pumps. This went on for 5 minutes more until they got bored of their silly game and drove off. The moron was a plasterer and had his name and phone number written all over his van, plying his trade. Oh boy, I'm petty, and made a note of his details. A few weeks later, I called him up and said I'd bought a house in need of renovation and needed a quote to board out and skim the entire house. Quote. Oh, he was only too happy to quote for a big project, assuring me he was great at his trade and I could not find a better quote. We discussed his availability, and he was keen to come and look at the job. I gave him the address of a rundown house a few streets away from me that had recently sold at auction. He knew the property, he had driven past it a few times, and noticed it was up for auction. We arranged for him to call the following day. Of course I wasn't there! He rang a few times and left a voicemail checking where I was. Eventually, I called him back, very apologetic, said my husband had fallen off a ladder and I had to take him to A&E. He said, okay, I'll rearrange the visit. We arranged another time a few days later. The next appointment came and I had 2 more messages from him, clearly annoyed I wasn't there again. I called him back again and apologized. I said I could totally understand his anger and wasted time. It reminded me of the time I was sat at a petrol station a few weeks ago and some idiot and his mate stood having a good old chat whilst laughing at the drivers waiting to use the pumps. I heard the penny drop. That was when the raging and swearing started, which just set me off roaring with laughter. I made my point. It was fabulous. I spent the next few weeks blocking various numbers, sending abusive texts, but he got bored of that eventually. I hope he learned that actions have consequences. Story 13. What my mom did when her kid was gifted a joke book. I remember this happening and thinking it was funny, but as I've gotten older, I've realized exactly how badass my parents were. So 40 years ago for Christmas, my mom's college roommate, whom she was still close to having been not that far removed from college, gave me a joke book for Christmas. I was 5 and was starting to read pretty good. And apparently I drove my entire family absolutely bonkers with this book. In this case, I remember loving the book and taking it with me everywhere, toured jokes to everyone who came across my path. The next Christmas, my mom's college roommate's son was turning 5. So my parents went to Radio Shack and bought a gift for this kid. It was a wearable fireman's helmet with working lights and siren. They made sure to include batteries. My parents have always been very kind, forgiving, non-confrontational, so this bit of pettiness fills me with endless amusement. Story 14. Steal my meds, so you get the flu. This happened over 10 years ago. I had been living with this guy and I kept my prescriptions in a basket on the counter. I noticed that my PRN Valium was low, and I just had it filled. I went and got a refill, and the next week it was low. Now mind you, I hadn't taken any. Come to find out, the guy was supplying his buddies with my Valium. So I get a bottle of Ducalox laxative pills and replaced the Valium with it and hid the real stuff. Needless to say, he and his buddies came down with a bad case of the flu, and it was funny to see all of them running to the bathroom at the funeral home when his mom passed. I kept that Valium bottle filled with Ducalox until the day I moved out and left it there. Story 15. Here's to a soapy windshield. I lived in a small, crowded city just across the river from New York. Parking was free but very limited. Would have to cruise a long time to find an empty spot. One bitterly cold evening, I lucked out and found a big spot right in front of my apartment door. I pulled up to back into it. Blinker was on, and a guy with a smaller car pulled in, head first. Sitting there stunned, he got out and gave me the finger and walked off smiling. About 1 a.m., I got a bar of soap and wrote clean but derisive messages on every window of his car and completely covered the windshield so that it would be impossible to drive without cleaning. With the weather so frigid, he would have to use a lot of warm water to remove all the soap. The temperature alone would freeze water in no time, and he would be very cold with the amount of time it would take him. Next morning at 6 a.m., the car was gone, so I can only imagine his irritation. But I let him know I was the guy pulling into this spot that he selfishly took. Told him I have his license plate number, and if I ever see him steal another spot, I will ratchet up the revenge. I didn't see his reaction, but what I envisioned was satisfying enough. Story 16. Video game revenge. My son and his friend, both 9 meters, were playing Super Smash Bros. Ultimate with me in a free-for-all match and decided to gang up on me and not attack each other. The punks. After the match, it was lunchtime. The revenge. I made them both peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. When I grabbed 4 slices of bread, I swapped them around, so each sandwich was made from 2 pieces of bread that were not adjacent in the loaf. The edges of the sandwiches do not line up as well. HAHAHAHAA. Please do not call child services about my cruel revenge. Story 17. Be an ass, I will make you late. Be an ass, I will make you late. This happened back in 2012, 2013. I was driving downtown looking for a parking spot. One opened up right on the road where I needed to be. I put my signal on and made that move all drivers make slightly to the right, indicating I'm taking that parking spot. I was getting ready to parallel park and a transit bus pulls right up behind me, up against my bumper so I cannot back. Now my view is this is a professional driver, and they should know better. So I, being the petty guy the first AM, sat there waiting for him to back up. At this point, the bus driver is starting to wave his hands and lean on his horn. I am a patient guy, and I decided to wait him out as he's honking his horn. I have a few hours to kill, so I am not concerned about the time, whereas the transit driver has a tight schedule, so I know he's not happy. Pull out my work notebook and start doing some work. He's getting more angry and trying to intimidate me to move. The thing is, I'm a big guy, 6 feet 6 inches and 200 pounds, so I am not going to be intimidated. This is the main downtown thoroughfare, and traffic is starting to back up considerably. Eventually, someone with authority comes along and basically tells the bus driver he is wrong. However, because of traffic now, he cannot back up, and I do not want to give up my parking spot, so I agreed to move ahead, just enough for the bus to pull out into the opposing traffic lane and pass me. That's allowing me into my parking spot. I am confident that he will not try to pull that move again, and I had the satisfaction of watching him sweat, knowing that he is now behind schedule, and at some point, we'll have to explain that to his boss. Story 18. The reason why my ex is my ex. Many years ago, after the birth of my oldest son, I desperately needed a job. I was scouring through the job section of as many newspapers as I could get my hands on. The pickings were slim, as my highest qualification was graduating high school. I had to ignore minimum wage jobs because it would cost more than it paid. Then my ex said some magic words. Stop being so picky. You're never going to earn more than minimum wage. I saw RED. Then I found the AD. They advertised free training to become a software engineer. Professional certification AND gets you a job afterwards. The only requirement was a high school diploma with a passing math grade. At first I was very wary because it definitely felt like it was too good to be true and possibly a scam, but I had nothing to lose by just checking it out. So off I went. The first day of the acceptance process was grueling. Multiple timed aptitude tests that took hours. The ones who passed were invited for a second round of tests. This time there were a lot less people. Out of the 30 people from the first day, only 2 of us were accepted at the end. And it wasn't a scam. The reason why it was free was because the employers would pay for the training. I was thrilled. Then followed the most intense 4 months of my life. I was determined to prove my ex wrong. 8 hours in class every weekday, another 6 for homework and studying, then studying and doing a weekend project for another 20 hours over the weekend. I only got about 6 hours of sleep each night. Thankfully, my son was sleeping through the night by then. And I made it. Did really well in my final exams, too. The job search was short and sweet, and since it was only 3 years before Y2K and even entry-level engineers were earning good salaries, when I got my offer, my salary was more than my ex got. Internally, I was elated and thought, take that, you insufferable prick. Didn't say it out loud though. As time went by, I kept getting really good raises and promotions. My ex finally had enough of the humiliation and wanted a divorce. I jumped at the chance to escape, and that is how my ex became my ex. ETA. While I was studying, my mother took care of my son, and my in-laws helped with groceries and utilities. My ex could only afford to pay for rent and gas. Story 19. Made the truck driver back way up. As I was leaving a store, I was backing out of a space in a narrow single-lane parking aisle, one way headed away from the store. And just as I backed out, a large truck with a trailer proceeded to pull out of a double spot much further down, where there were lots of empty spaces for him to maneuver. But instead of exiting the correct way, he decided to turn and go against traffic. I saw this happening and could have pulled back into my spot and wait for him to exit, but nope, I had to teach him a lesson for going the wrong way, especially in a narrow, single-lane aisle. So I proudly drove toward him as he drove toward me. I thought he'd get the hint and stop, but he didn't until we got pretty close. He honked. I honked. I stared him down. He finally conceded and backed up that trailer about 20 parking spots. Ooh! Open-mouth smile. Story 20. The day I was invisible. Years ago, I worked at a public school. The district assigned us a temporary administrator, a man who knew what was wrong with everyone and everything and just how to fix it all. He drove us up the walls. I spent his entire time with us, making bets on who would be first to cram him into a locker. One thing he hated was how other people would go to deal with things, leaving the command center, the office, instead of commanding. One day he walked into the office, and the receptionist was in the restroom. The principal was in a meeting, and the office manager had gone to look at something. I, the registrar, was working head down at my desk. That man walked into the middle of the room and announced on the radio to 15 people, criticizing all of them, including the principal in her meeting. "This office is completely empty." What if a parent walked in? He was 5 feet from me. I picked up my radio and said to him and 15 other people, "Doctor underscore underscore underscore, I'm right here." "Hi, your glasses are on your head, sir." Small, but very satisfying. Story 21. Sometimes it may backfire. My ex-husband was a very recent amputee, like it of the hospital 2 days recent. He's also a chef, so when I told him I was going to a certain grocery store, he insisted he had to go with me. We parked in the handicap spot with the wheelchair area so I could help him in and out. When we came out, some asshole had parked in the wheelchair access area, so close that I couldn't even open his door. No placard or plate to indicate they needed a handicap parking spot, and one just wasn't available. I lost my shit. I was tired, stressed, and angry. So I took my keys and basically destroyed the side of the car that was closest to mine. I got in the driver's seat so I could back out and load my ex in the traffic lane, and my car wouldn't start. It took about 30 to 45 minutes to get it started, loose battery connector, before I could get out of there. By this time, I'd sort of calmed down about the parking. I'd wheeled my ex inside to stay warm, but I was so afraid they'd come out and there would be a physical altercation. Luckily, I never saw them, but I've never seriously considered doing that again. Hopefully, they never considered parking like that again. Either way, I have no regrets. They deserved it. Story 22. Why I decided to go bald. I was getting a buzz cut weekly because of a cowlick I had that would bug me if my hair got too long. I thought my mom, who used to cut my hair, was making it up. But no, it's a real thing, lol. It was costing me $25, including tip, at a local haircuttery place. I hated that place. It was usually full of people with children who wouldn't keep still, and I'd get a barber man or woman who couldn't cut me properly at times. Now, I was going from a buzz cut 3 to a buzz cut 1, and sometimes I'd look like Alfalfa from the Little Rascals movie. I was ticked off. I decided to find an actual barber. Oh, court. I found someone who did it in his spare time, since he was retired. My cost, including tip, was $30, $25 plus $5 tip, cash only as well. So I had to stop at the ATM before I got there as well, because I don't carry cash hardly anymore, TBH. Well, I have 2 disabled sisters who sometimes make it hard for me to go in and see him on my usual day Saturday. Well, one week I was extremely busy with one of my sisters being at home. So I asked my mom if she'd cut my hair for me just once. She said sure, no issues, and it came out great. I finally was able to get out and see him on my usual Saturday the following week, and he accused me of going somewhere else. He knows the situation in my house, as I told him it's hectic a lot of times here, lol. After I explained my mom cut it 4 times in a row, I shouldn't have to explain my situation to you or anyone else. "Do you want my business?" I said FK this and decided to start cutting my own hair. I now use a simple Gillette razor and shave my hair on my time, and I'm saving $30 weekly. I wonder how he feels knowing he lost a lifelong customer over his assumptions. TL. Drive. Barber got pissed because I missed a week after I had my mom cut it, and he didn't believe me when I told him so. So, I decided to finally go bald and do it myself with a razor. Now saving me money weekly. Story 23. How to silence a monster. I'll just say it bluntly at the start here. My genetic father is a horrible human being. Wacky. By this point, I have completely cut contact with him. However, this happened on the very last time I ever had to see him. My mother left him when I was about 13-ish. However, due to his lies and manipulation, the court system failed me, and I was still forced to see him. So the abuse he inflicted continued until I was 18, and only got worse after the divorce because he knew that hurting me meant it would hurt my mother. He is the absolute definition of trash, and my rather unique situation was only fuel on this dumpster fire. I won't go into too great of detail about his depravity, but I will simplify it and say that if you weren't a straight, white man or a straight woman in a prairie dress, then you were going to hell in his eyes and didn't deserve the time of day. As for me, being born as both genders, it was a living hell. I am intersex, which basically means I have incomplete traits from both sides. I actually didn't even find this out until I was almost an adult, however. I had a lot of health problems because of it, and due to looking highly androgynous growing up, I was called a freak. At birth, I was signed off as a girl, and when I began having some unique changes with puberty, it was drilled into me that I was basically just an ugly woman who didn't deserve anything because I didn't meet my father's standards. The discussion about my gender and who I am is a very long story. However, as an adult, I made the choice for both my physical and mental health to become fully male. Due to my father, there were only two people in my entire family who knew about this: my mother and my grandmother on my father's side. My mother is an amazing person and was extremely happy for me, and my grandmother was the sweetest woman you'd ever meet. Picture the stereotypical grandma who bakes cookies in children's books, and that was her. The woman would give her last penny just to make sure you felt happy and safe. She was delighted to hear that I was starting to find who I was. My grandfather passed away shortly after I was born. However, my grandmother started dating again many years later, and when I was 18, I got an invitation to her wedding. She was in her 70s and acting like a teenager with her new fiancé, and it was amazing to see her so happy. Of course I wanted to go. There was just one problem. My father would be there too. At this point, I was already on hormone therapy for my treatments, had facial hair, a flat chest, didn't even look like my old self anymore, and I didn't want to think of the hell that would rain down from my father seeing me like this. But then I stopped myself in that moment and thought about it a little more, and after a bit of contemplating, I figured this would be perfect. He'd always lied to family about what happened, painting himself as this loving father, so what kind of perfect dad wouldn't be happy for their son? Out of absolute spite, I went to a thrift store, got myself a classy black and purple gown, got some makeup, a pair of heels, and went to the wedding in full drag. My mother questioned as to why I was dressing up like a woman for this, instead of just grabbing my suit, and when I told her what I was going to do, she broke out into full belly laughter and began insisting on helping me get ready to go. The wedding was lovely, everyone was smiling, my grandmother was glowing the entire time, and I actually didn't see my father for the bulk of the reception. We had a big family, so I wasn't really surprised. However, at the end, as everyone was talking and getting cake, that's when my father spotted me. By this point, most of the family didn't even recognize me, however. When I was standing next to my mother, my father must have put the pieces together and started walking over. I told my mother to go and be with my grandmother, and I was now left alone with my abuser in a crowd of people. He came right up to me, asked how I was doing, and I just shrugged and continued people watching. He leaned against the wall with me, and just as I expected, he began lecturing me. He pointed to my grandmother, and now step-grandfather, and said, "You see that? Make sure you get yourself a good man like that. Someone who makes enough to support you so you can stay home." I looked over at him, and in my now deep voice I said, very simply, "That would be great if I didn't have a girlfriend." I wish I had a camera right at that moment, just to capture the image of his eyes growing wide as he choked on his own words, and for the first time, he was left speechless. I could see him getting angry and trying hard to contain it, but I didn't care. I just casually waved over my grandmother. She came over smiling, and for the very first time, I spoke openly with her in front of my father, telling her about my girlfriend and my journey into becoming a man. She was thrilled for me having a girlfriend, giving me a huge hug, and telling me to invite her so that she could come celebrate with everyone. And so, that's exactly what I did. My father remained speechless, just staring at me as his face turned red, not daring to say a damn thing in front of his own mother, and the entire family. This was the one time that he was forced to be a decent human being to his child because he was surrounded by everyone he had lied to, and he was stuck between that lie and the man he really was. After a while of him just stewing in his very clear anger, he turned around and left without a word, walking out on his own mother's wedding. My grandmother had me and my mother sit with her and her now husband at a table, and we all laughed and ate, enjoying our time together and making memories without him. My step-grandfather asked why my father left so suddenly and asked if everything was all right, and when I told him what happened, he looked at me with a sigh and said, "This is supposed to be a joining of families today. If he doesn't want to be a part of that family, then so be it." Story 24. It's not just people who can be petty. So this morning I let the hounds out for their morning business. When they came back and my 7 years old bitch was grumpy and revved/growled at the not quite 3 years old meathead who had woken up refreshed and playful. The old girl goes into her crate bed for solitude, so meathead lays down in front of the door just staring at her. No way she can get out without him moving. Classic sibling type, "I'm not touching you" stuff. This is all happening whilst I'm making morning coffee mind. And anyways, by the time my coffee is ready, meathead has decided the stare down isn't enough and has turned around to lay on his back with his arse and balls at her door instead. Dumb foul. Anyone who says dogs can't be spiteful or petty. Story 25. Don't pay me and treat me like dirt? I will hide and lock your company's files and ghost you. So for context, I started my teaching career as an ESL teacher in Asia. I worked from some pretty cool places, but the last place I worked at before I became a teacher was the worst. Let's call it English Center. For privacy reasons, I won't tell you the city or country as I am still working there. English Center had around 3 centers owned by the same owner. Now this center was run by an owner who basically used the business as a cash cow. He would overwork you and underpay you. I often had to threaten to take him to court to pay me on time. So I was contracted to work 4 classes a day of 1 hour each initially. Eventually I was given 6 classes and very little marking and contract time. On top of that, you were expected to work after hours and do marking during your lunch. I was also forced to be a center manager and admin. So not only was I teaching, I had to deal with admin and teacher and center issues as well. After being paid late for the 4th time, I decided I had had enough. So I started looking for a new job. I got a job at a new school and started my visa renewal process. This takes 4 weeks. I also didn't tell the owner I was leaving either. At this point, I also had admin access to the center server/network. This had the entire e-syllabus and everything. It also had student progress and reports which were given to parents monthly. If this file disappeared, the school would be screwed. 4 weeks later, on my last day, the owner yelled at me for something silly, can't remember what, and dumped an extra class on me, and then told me to work on my off day. At this point, I was seeing red and was about to delete everything. Instead, I selected the files and put a password, a random combo of letters and symbols, on them, and then selected them to be hidden so they couldn't be seen. So, if you click the file properties, one can see. I then simply packed my stuff and walked out into the morning sun. A while later, the owner tried to keep on calling me. At this point, I was on the beach sipping an ice-cold beer. I ignored him and continued ignoring him. After a year, I met someone who said that the owner couldn't find the files and was panicking because parents were demanding to see their children's progress. In addition, many teachers walked out, which resulted in him having to close his business. TLDR. Ghosted files and ghosted owner. Sipped a beer while the world crumbled. Story 26. Block my route? I'll take my grocery bags out and leave the cart in front of your door. At Whole Foods, some thoughtless dimwit was parked in the red no parking zone right in front of the doors. They were just sitting in the driver's seat, waiting. On my way out, there was no good way to go past them, other than to block all traffic by rolling directly down the main corridor of the parking lot. So I kept going, stopped when their car wouldn't let me pass, then grabbed my groceries and left the cart directly in front of their door. Then they followed me to my car and tried to park in a way to block me from exiting. But the joke's on them because they left me just enough room to reverse out, inches from their bumper, and I casually drove away. They were super surprised, and I'm sure they thought I was going to hit them. Luckily, I know exactly how big my car is, and I'm not afraid to use that knowledge. Story 27. Tow truck company threatened to dump my car in a ditch over a $36 payment. Due to some recent snow, my car slid off my driveway and got stuck in a ditch next to my house. I contacted Insurance Roadside Assistance, and they picked a random local tow truck company to winch my car out. I carefully checked with insurance before the rescue to verify that it was not an emergency, and I verified that it was completely covered by insurance. My insurance sent me a written verification that it was covered. The tow truck driver arrived and got my car unstuck. After he was complete, I asked if he needed anything, and he said he needed to check on payments. I told him that I had written statements showing it's supposed to be covered by insurance. He got back in his truck and drove away, so I assumed everything was good. Nope. Go. About 15 minutes later, I get a call from the tow company owner demanding that I pay $36, or they weren't going to release my car. I was confused because my car was parked in my driveway, and the driver was long gone. So I said my insurance says it's covered, so please send an invoice, and I can send that to them. The owner started screaming at me that that's not how this works. You must pay the remainder. Oh, we aren't leaving. I was like, your driver is gone. He's not supposed to do that. He will come back and block your driveway until you pay $36. You cheapskates make me sick. He will come back and put your car back in the ditch. At this point, I was kind of stunned and laughed at her and said, sure, you come back and put my car in the ditch, which made her so mad she hung up. A little bit later, I got a text with an invoice showing I owed an additional $125 for a waiting fee. I texted her back asking where the driver was waiting because my property was empty. She claimed that GPS and the dash cam proved he was in my driveway. I responded with, well, he must be invisible because no one is here. And she stopped responding. My insurance eventually agreed to pay the $36 balance. I have never had a small business owner behave this way to me. I sent in bad reviews to all the sites I could find and did a complaint to the BBB. Gary, is there anything else I can do as petty revenge? I know Reddit, FS, tow truck companies. Edit. The company is responding to the reviews, blaming me for not knowing in advance I owed $36 and saying it was a completely professional conversation. Story 28. Hit my car and leave? Bet. This story involves my mom, 64F, who's severely disabled, and a rando couple who hold a flagrant disregard for other people's property, etc. So my mom, let's call her Sarah, was in the parking lot sitting in her car, preparing to get out and go inside the restaurant she was at. If it matters, she parks in the handicapped parking. Enter the disrespectful couple. They park next to Sarah, they're to the left of my mom's car, and their door opens wide, hitting my mom's car. Hard. Sarah rolls down her window and says, hey, in opening your door, you hit my car pretty hard just now. Did you not realize that? And the couple looks, shrugs, and nonchalantly responds, oh, sorry about that, and continues on inside, not offering anything more or any sort of information to fix the damage done. My grandpa's favorite phrase was always, I don't get mad, I get even. Keep that in mind. So Sarah watches them go into the restaurant, get seated, and go on about their night like nothing happened. She waits until they're out of sight, and she opens her door, hard, hitting the side of their car. And again, and again. Then, she decides she's not so hungry after all, and drives off. Moral of the story. Just because someone's disabled doesn't mean they're incapable of revenge when necessary. Gary. I've got a lot of Sarah stories, I'll provide more later, haha. Story 29. Mom's petty revenge from my youth. Reading another post about door dings, I had to post a favorite from my youth. Mom, Dad, and us 5 kids all piled into the Chevy 2-wagon to drive into the big city for our dentist appointments. We parked in a parking garage. New experience for me. On the way out, we were all getting in to the car when a woman pulled in to the spot next to us. She flung the door open and hit our car fairly hard. My mom exclaimed, hey! But the lady ignored her and scurried off, high heels clicking. My mom put her hand on my dad's arm and said, don't pull out yet. When the lady made it around the corner, my mom laid down and put both feet against the passenger door. She kicked as hard as she could and bashed her door into the lady's car. She pulled the door closed and kicked it open again. She pulled the door and told Dad, you can leave now. The lady's door was caved in. My dad never said anything. When we got home, he just got out the vice grips and straightened the edge of the door on the Chevy. 30. Entitled woman hits my mother's car door. She takes revenge. It's not my story but my mother's, and God rest her soul, she would want me to put it in here. Apologies for formatting, I'm on mobile, etc., etc. I am too young to actually remember this happening. But one day, as my mother and father were getting ready to leave the store in their slightly older car, a lady pulled in next to them with her nicer, newer car. As Karen opens the door, she hits the passenger car door where my mother is sitting. No big deal, and my mother said had she apologized, things would have been different. However, Karen does not, and proceeds to walk off, and does not even acknowledge that she'd done this. My mother bot, being one to let things go, yells out her open window, hey, you hit our car door! My dad tries to shush her, but this does not work. When my mother was in full mode, nothing stopped her. She was like a freight train going down a track. The lady looks at her like she's soured milk, and proceeds to walk off. This was a serious mistake, because my mother proceeded to slam her car door open and announce, "Oh, I'm so sorry I hit your car door," over and over and over, as my dad tries to calm her down. Spoiler alert, he did not calm her down. She did this 7 or 8 times while the lady stood there with her mouth hanging open watching her. Finally, she shut the door and through the open window said some people are so rude about hitting others' car doors as my dad backed up and pulled away. People wonder where I got my pettibone from. I know it was from my dear mother, rest her soul. Rolling on the floor laughing. Rolling on the floor laughing. Story 31. Laundry thief. This is short and small, but I thought I'd post it anyways. I live in an apartment where each floor has a communal laundry room with a couple machines. If someone loses a sock or something, it's common to see them just placed on top of the machines, and whoever lost it will eventually come grab it. Also, loads are $4.25 USD between washing and drying, so I can almost understand where the thief is coming from later in the story, but still. I was running a washing load, but the time had gone up by like 5 minutes, which luckily did not cost me extra, but all my alarms were off and I had to reset them, so I was already annoyed. Them in the dryer, and I'm pretty sure there's some items that are not mine, but decided that's a later problem. When I sort through all the clothes in my apartment, there are at least 5 larger items, like shirts and pants, along with some socks that are definitely not mine. I imagine the thief expects their clothes to magically appear on the machines, but I was pissed. My clothes were barely able to be considered dry, and they messed with my routine, which is pretty important to me. Luckily for me, the clothes happened to be in my size, and half of them were pretty cute, so I just decided, fuck it, I'll steal back. Instead of their clothes being magically cleaned and dried for them, I pulled a disappearing act instead. I still have one of those shirts, lol. A couple of them were really thin and see-through, to the point I would feel bad donating it, so I ended up throwing some of it out. Sorry if this is lame, but it felt good at the time, so I thought someone might enjoy it. Story 32. Fried green tomatoes. Has anyone seen the movie Fried Green Tomatoes? There's a middle-aged woman waiting for a parking spot, and 2 young women zip before her. She tells them she was waiting for it. They tell her, well, we're younger and faster, then laugh and walk away. She reserves into their car and says, you may be younger and faster, but I'm older and have more insurance. In the next scene, she tells her husband it was an accident, and he yells, 9 times! My sister, our friend, and I had watched it one night. The house next door to hers was rented, and by a group of young people, they kept partially blocking her driveway. She asked them multiple times not to. They just said they wouldn't do it again, but the next day they did. The day after watching the movie, they were blocking her driveway again. She just turned the car on and reversed into their car. When they came running out, she said, I'm older and have more insurance. I laughed so hard when she told me. P.S. If you haven't seen that movie, it's great. Story 33. Store refused to allow exchange defective battery or issue refund later. They lost $350. This happened mid-2020 during COVID. As a farmer, I can't take a break from anything due to pandemic, although I still had to deal with local and state laws like mask in stores and 6 feet distance. I was getting my combine harvester cleaned up, lubed, right implement attached, removed a few dead mice that got caught inside and died, and ready to start harvesting wheats. The wheat, when planted in late fall or early winter, are meant to be harvested by late summer, and the window to harvest them can be mere weeks. Anyway, I noticed the harvester was not starting up, and when I checked, the battery wasn't holding any charge. Trickle charger ran for a few days, and the battery remained well below minimum required power. I guess the cold winter may have sapped the battery, and it was already old. I went to a local farming store to get a new battery. These batteries are $350 for my John Deere harvester, so not cheap. They didn't take the old one for core exchange as returns were temporarily banned. I could take it later and get the core fee back. I got it in and checked. Times click. Nothing. I checked the battery. Deader than a doornail. My trickle charger couldn't detect the battery. That seemed to indicate there's a full open like a missed connection inside, or a few damaged lead plates. So back to the store. It should be a simple straight exchange, right? Except with Michigan's temporary ban on return to prevent people from getting too close to employees or sharing COVID-contaminated items. Stores were required to extend the return period starting from end of the ban so people can return. Unfortunately, the only option store offered was another $350 battery. The store policy had 2 weeks limit, after ban is lifted that is, to return batteries for exchange, and absolutely no refund. With the temporary law, I couldn't exchange it right that time. I asked if they could sell it now and issue refund on the dead battery later when the restriction is lifted. They said no. I can't wait until the ban is lifted to exchange the dud, as my unharvested crop could be ruined if the ban remained well into winter. I involved my credit card company because I was getting screwed out of $350 with a dead battery. No exchange allowed and no refund later. I ended up in a three-way call hell for some time with my credit card bank and the store. They tried to find compromises like loading me another combine harvester. When I told them what model and size mine is, and they looked up, they only had model FUT 3 1/4, FUT for fucking useless tractor, barely bigger than a lawnmower, and not enough HP to handle any of the harvester implement or to tow the grain wagon for wheat dump. Thus, renting from another place would be the only option. Heart attack inducing $75 per hour, and I told them 1,100 acres to be farmed, with average 30 hours to clear it at best. They suggested sending some local employees to help hand gather wheat. Sir, do you know how much 1,100 acres of wheat is? Relevant time. 1,100 acres is roughly 1 3/4 of a square mile, 4.5 kilometers for the non-Americans. And all those has to be gathered in a few weeks. I would need at minimum a few hundred people, hand-cutting all the wheat, thresh them all, and dump the wheat into the trucks. A few of your employees might be able to do 1 acre a day, but not finish 1,100 acres in a few weeks. Few hundred people doing it for a few weeks at standard wage would far exceed the cost of one harvester rental for a few days, and be well within the cost of a used, similar-sized harvester. A team of just 5 employees doing 1 acre a day would end up finishing in 3 years, with most of the wheat rejected for being too old, rotten, and moldy. We were still back on the battery. The store pointed out state law prohibited return and suggested I wait to return for exchange. I said I can't wait for when I can exchange the battery, as it may be too late to harvest my wheat. The credit card reminded them they had obligation to sell working merchandises, and they need to make an exception to either exchange for another now or allow defective battery return for full refund when returns are allowed. The store said no refund on returned battery for any reason and refused to allow exchange due to law. Either exchange it now, make an exception and allow refund later, pay for a rental combine harvester out of their pocket, or send a few hundred employees on their dime. No, 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 and no. Ultimately, the CC ruled in my favor, and the store was told they can come and pick up the dead battery anytime for the return. I got a new battery from a different store, and have never gone back to the first one since then. The dead battery and the original old battery has been sitting in my barn for 4.5 years now. I've sent them a reminder when Michigan lifted the return ban, and again a few months later. Since it is considered abandoned after they ignored my last reminder, maybe I'll send it someone to try and rebuild it. If it's not rebuildable, I can still take both somewhere and get some money out of it. If the employee of this store is reading this and remembers it, this will be your last chance to come in and pick up your damn battery. Bring help and a broom. That battery is around 120 pounds, 55 kilogram, with about 20 pounds of dust on top. Story 34. Brother-in-law ruins his son's Nintendo Switch. So my brother and I went together and bought a Switch for my 2 young nephews last year for Christmas, along with several accessories. And to say they love it is an understatement. They adore this thing and love talking their uncles about all of the games they've been playing. It actually makes me happy to see, as it reminds me of my brother and I when we were younger. We bonded a lot playing games growing up. So I guess one day they were outside bored, and as kids do, had a not-so-great idea or intrusive thought, and carved both of their names into the side of their father's truck using a rock. Now, this isn't a very nice truck, and is really just used to get around the property, but he was very upset nonetheless. He's telling me about this happening just the other day, and I say to him, "You know, I made sure to put a screen protector on the Switch we gave them." He just stared at me. So if someone were to write on it, it wouldn't hurt it. Skip to now, and the Nintendo Switch has in big bold letters, DAD, right across the screen. They were mortified. I'm sure he'll leave it on for a good couple weeks before telling and removing it to make sure it doesn't happen again. Story 35. Bus gossip. So this happened when I was around 16. At the time, I dressed very goth/punk and had a few different shades of pink hair that was very back-combed and gothy clothes. I was on the bus into town in southern Sweden when 2 middle-aged women got onto the bus. They sat down behind me, and I thought that was the end of it. All of a sudden, they start gossiping in Dutch. However, what they didn't know is that I'm half Dutch. I grew up with the language. I sat there listening for a bit while they talked mad SHT about pretty much everyone on the bus. And then they said to each other, "The girl in front of us is the worst though. How can she even go outside looking like that? I'd be ashamed," and a few other things that I can't remember anymore. My bus stop was the next one, so I waited until I was about to leave, grabbed my things, looked at them, and gave them my sweetest smile and said in Dutch, "It's rude to talk SHT about other people. And you never know who knows your language. And I quite like my hair. Thank you very much. It was glorious to watch them, as the color of their faces drained. I saw them again a few weeks later, again gave them a sweet smile, and said again in Dutch, "Hello ladies, I hope you have a wonderful day today." And they again looked mortified and ashamed, and ushered each other away.